Binance founder Changpeng Zhao, otherwise known as CZ, which we'll call him for the remainder of this podcast, is going to jail. For how long, nobody knows for sure. It could be a year, it could be 10 years. I'm leaning toward the lighter end of the spectrum. And today on today's Sense and Signal podcast, we're going to explore CZ's leadership style and the things that led to his Icarus-style downfall. He flew too close to the cryptocurrency sun, as it were, and has now fallen. He's resigned as CEO of the company he founded in 2017, Binance, and the company he grew to become the largest cryptocurrency exchange in the world. The company has also agreed to pay $4 billion. That's B with a capital B. It's a lot of money, $4 billion to the Justice Department and the Treasury Department. He is also going to jail again, like I said at the beginning. Maybe 1 year, maybe 10, who knows? We'll find out in the coming months. So what leadership lessons can we learn from somebody like CZ? Obviously, we can learn from him as an object example, so things that we don't want to do, but there are probably also things that we can learn that are positive that he did, because there has to be something to the secret sauce that he has that helped him build this international company, and in a distributed way. It is a truly distributed company where there is no home base. And so we'll get into the complexities of that and how it also feeds into this whole story and narrative about CZ and his Icarus rise to international power as the CEO of the largest cryptocurrency exchange in the world, and his downfall. And you could also view him as a tragic hero. He had some hubris. He had some fatal flaw that led to his downfall. But there's also, again, with every tragic hero, there are also positive traits. So what are they? So we'll be exploring that in this podcast episode today. And so one lens I always like to use, it's kind of fun, is the dark quadrad traits framework to analyze people like CZ, people who've come to power. We've done this with Sam Bankman-Fried, so we might as well do it with CZ since he's the next cryptocurrency king to fall. And I'm sure there are going to be others because the Justice Department is not stopping with Binance. People might not want to hear that in the crypto world, but I think more heads are going to be rolling. It's not just Sam and it's not just CZ. But before we go there, let's look at exactly what he was charged with. The following is from the press release the Justice Department put out after the guilty verdict was submitted, or the guilty plea was submitted. And so let's hear exactly what they have to say. This is the lead of the press release. Binance Holdings Limited, Binance, the entity that operates the world's largest cryptocurrency in the world, Binance.com, pleaded guilty today and has agreed to pay $4 billion. Let me underscore that B. That is a capital B, $4 billion, to resolve the Justice Department's case or investigation into violations they were related to the Bank Secrecy Act, failure to register as a money transferring business or money transmitting business, and the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So basically, there are a lot of compliance issues with Binance. They were told repeatedly that they needed to register with the United States and the Treasury Department as a money transmitting organization. They refused to do so, and the reason that they refused to do so is because they knew the regulations that they would have to obey as an entity registered with the U.S. government would prevent them from some of the money laundering and other criminal activities that were happening on their platform. That's basically the Justice Department's case. And even though Merrick Garland has said that this is one of the biggest awards that the Justice Department has ever been able to secure for a criminal activity like this, $4 billion is still a flash in the pan for Binance. To me, like $4 billion, oh my God, I can't even imagine it. I can't even imagine what that really means. Imagine you're the same way. But for these Binance folks, especially CZ, who's worth $15 billion, again, capital B, $15 billion. He's one of the richest people in the world. $4 billion is a flash in the pan. I mean, yeah, that will hurt, but I mean, it's not going to hurt that much. I mean, I'm sure it's the kind of money that they're not going to miss, really. I mean, to me, after you've hit $1 billion, you're probably in a place where you're not going to miss. If you lost 10 million, it's like, all right, I lost 10 million, whatever. The value of money has to change when you're up at those heights, when you're flying so close to the monetary sun, as it were. So let's look at him in terms of the dark triad traits or dark quadrad traits. So we have four traits: narcissism, sadism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. And so let's start off with narcissism. Is he a narcissist? Well, yes, I think there has to be a level of narcissism when you achieve those heights as a leader, and you're running that level of that large of an organization. You have to have a lot of self-confidence and will. And those are positive traits too that aren't necessarily tied with narcissism, but I do think you have to be a level up above just basic self-confidence. So I think we could probably agree that there's some level of narcissism with him. And also, and you might be able to debate me on this particular point regarding his narcissism. He has said in the past that Binance has no home operating country. There's no place where it's actually located. It is wherever he is as the CEO. Now, in his leadership blogs and comments that he's made in the past, he always emphasizes team over self. Well, that does not seem to conform to what he has said about leadership in the past. Emphasizing the team over the self. That seems to emphasize the self over the team. Binance is where he is at. He is Binance. They're one and the same thing in his mind based on that statement. So there's a level of narcissism there. You could also make the point that it also represents the idea that he's running a distributed organization, and that's just an aspect of running a globally distributed organization where your teams are, they could be in Greece and Dubai and China and Russia and Ukraine and South America. They're all over the place. So maybe that's just an expression of his worldview based on the kind of environment he's working within. But I do think it does have enough narcissism to it that it also contributes to my determination that there is a level of narcissism. So that's one trait down. The next trait is Machiavellianism. Is he willing to do anything to get what he needs done? And I would say yes. Ding, ding, ding. Definitely on the Machiavellianism. That's there. He was willing to ignore federal regulations by the U.S. government and other governments around the world, so that he and his company could profit off of illegal transactions. And some of these are very serious illegal transactions that deal with criminal and terrorist organizations. Others might dispute that, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter kind of thing. But I think it's important to be cautious. Let there be some gravity in the world. And when you're dealing with criminal organizations and potential terrorist organizations, let's take at least those things seriously. So Machiavellianism, I think that's an easy one. Yes, he's has some Machiavellian traits. Psychopathy, does he have a lack of caring, a lack of empathy? Is there a coldness about him? Quite possibly. I think there is a level of psychopathy there. He did ignore warnings to comply with the U.S. government. That takes a level of detachment from consequence and some of the things he has said about his leadership style, which we will dig into, also lends itself to psychopathy, a lack of empathy for how his words and his actions might be impacting people. I think that might be there as well, maybe to a lesser degree than the narcissism and Machiavellianism. So clearly he at least gets 3 of the 4 dark quadrad traits. So he does get the dark triad. He is a dark triad figure in my mind. And that doesn't necessarily mean he's completely evil. It just means that those qualities, they're exhibited there. There's some evidence that you could make a case for those to be exhibited in his what we know of his leadership style. Is he a sadist? Does he meet the dark quadrad criteria? I'm uncertain about that. We have no evidence that he's intentionally harming people. So we'll take the sadism off the table for this assessment. So what was CZ like as a leader, or what is he like as a leader? Because he's likely to come back once he does his prison time. He might go back to Binance or start up a new company. He's an entrepreneur type. But what was he like as a leader, or is he like as a leader? We don't know. It's hard to tell because other people have to come forward to talk about their experiences working with him. In research on leadership, we know that one of the challenges of evaluating people's leadership is that they're not good at assessing themselves. You can talk to people in leadership positions and get their insights or what they think that are their insights about themselves, but that's of course highly biased, and they're going to construct narratives that amplify who they are and emphasize the traits that they want to emphasize. That's not to say that reflection and being self-critical is important to being a good leader or an effective leader, but we know there are limitations in the research when you approach it like that. So you often want to hear from others in the organization about a leader's qualities and behaviors. And we don't have much of that. Actually, what we do have is mostly from the crypto sphere, and they view CZ as kind of an angelic figure. There's already a lot of bias in their perspective on him. So that's more of a wait and see kind of thing to really do a true evaluation of his leadership. But he has made several blog posts that are revealing, and they've been written about in other publications that I think are useful to investigate to get a kind of flavor of what it might be like to work for a guy like CZ. I view him as very cold, practical, calculating, not necessarily a warm guy. And we'll get into some of those, but fair. I mean, there seems to be a striving for fairness and even ethics, although that brings up some irony that we'll get into later in the podcast. So in some of his blog posts, he makes some very concrete recommendations. So I'm going to go through some of those recommendations here and unpack what I think about his recommendations. One is to keep meetings short, around 15 minutes. And the purpose of that is let's get all the fluff out of the way. Let's just get to the action items. What do we need to do to move this project forward? I am in agreement with this one. I think we spend too much time in meetings and a necessary amount of time in meetings. I personally love short meetings, and when you can get it down to 15 minutes and all your business is done, there's no reason to hang out. Everyone's super busy and super swamped. Let's just keep the meeting short, and I think in organizations, investigating ways to eliminate and reduce the number of meetings and make them meetings that you actually are having really productive and beneficial to everybody's work. I'm definitely in agreement with that. So that's one I will take the CZ side on. Short meetings, let's keep them tight and focused and productive for sure. As far as his time management, he also has a philosophy of saying no to inefficient meetings, no to social activities, no to things, because that frees up more time. So you're able to do a lot of things as far as work and read and research and think. It's important from his point of view to be able to say no to things to free up your time for other things. I tend to agree with that as well. Everything's a sacrifice. You can't do everything when you're in a leadership position. So you have to start strategically saying, where's my time best allocated and where is it not? And I think that's a hard one for a lot of leaders, especially type A leaders who want to be everything to everybody. You can't be. You got to set those boundaries. So again, on that one, I would agree with them. Learn how to say no. It's setting up those boundaries and prioritizing how you are using your time is actually really important. Related to that, he doesn't chit chat. He doesn't come off as what we would call a transformational or relational leader or even servant leader, as we've discussed on previous podcasts, those frameworks of leadership. He doesn't want to dig into people's relationships. Again, he's very action oriented. He's not going to be the guy who talks about the latest Star Wars movie around the water cooler. He's going to get right down to business, again, focusing on those actions. And he's not going to care about your new nephew or grandchild or maybe even your own child. He's going to care about what's getting getting done right now in the project that we're working on. Might not work in every kind of workplace environment. There are places that really do value those interpersonal relationships. And so one of the themes of his recommendations is also to think about context, what industry he's working in, which is the tech sector, specifically the software development sector. And is this in an international distributed workforce setting. So maybe within that particular setting, these kind of practices or in-personal practices work better. But I think in other organizations, and I'm thinking like higher education as one, that would not be as effective. I think you depend on building relationships and trust to get things done. And that's hard to do if you're not actually chit-chatting and having those casual conversations as you're walking around. That could be a lot more challenging. But that's where he's coming from. No chit chat. He's also a notoriously voracious reader. He has lots of book recommendations, and people have asked him, CZ, how do you have so much time to read so many books? Well, he reads them fast. Actually, he listens to them on audio. So he's probably an Audible subscriber, and he listens to it at 2.5x speed. So he gets through them fast too. Probably why he's working and doing other things. But now that he's going to prison, I highly recommend that CZ consider turning it back down to 1.0 speed and reading some books on ethics or listening to some books on ethics. I think it might be valuable for you to use your time in prison to reflect on how you ended up there, CZ. But more on that later. He also says it's important for leaders to behave in an ethical manner because if you don't, whatever you've done that's unethical will come back to haunt you. I'm just going to leave that one there. He also focuses on teams over self and definitely recommends shuffling the teams around frequently so people get more experiences and more opportunity to develop their leadership skills. I actually kind of agree with this one. I like this one. Oftentimes we put people into specific roles or specific teams and they end up there for the rest of their career at the organization that they're in. But giving people the opportunity to move around and try different things and learn different things, I think is really important. And I do think it builds strength within your group. It builds their capacity as leaders. They get to know about different aspects of the organization and brings the diversity of points of view to each new team that's reconstructed because people are bringing different insights and experiences to the conversation around whatever problem they're tackling. So I actually agree with this one, kind of creating an environment where you can build, teams that you can reconstruct every so often and mix up the teams and bring in new viewpoints. I think that's actually a really good idea. This one has also been written about quite a bit. He likes to give candid feedback in person in front of groups. I mean, in person, I guess it's online because everything in his world is distributed on the internet, right? He's a remote, his whole organization's remote. But in those environments where everyone's in the meeting together, if he sees somebody's doing wrong, he's not going to pull them aside and talk to them in a separate Zoom meeting or whatever meeting platform they're using to talk through. He's going to say it in front of the entire group and call the person out for whatever issue that he sees they're having. And he says point blank that, some people were taken aback by this approach when they joined my organization, but they eventually adapted. Now, this is another one where I think this is a contextual and cultural to his organization. And maybe it works. Maybe that's what it works in that tech sector, software development sector. I don't think it would work in every environment. I think you would stir some resentment in people if you called them out in public. So this is one I'd say a very cautious. I can see where he's coming from to a degree, but I think leaders would need to be very cautious about implementing a policy or practice like this when working with their teams. People don't like to get shamed in public or feel like they're being shamed in public, even if that's not the intent. And so that could, again, stir a lot of resentment, create turnover, diminish people's ability to summon motivation for projects and things like that. So definitely careful with that one. Related to that, he recommends not to praise people for doing a good job. His point of view is that the reward should be internal. You should be valuing yourself, and you should be able to assess whether you've done a good job, and that should be an internal thing. And he also doesn't want to praise people because he can't see all the good work that's happening across the organization. So he doesn't want to feel like he's favoring one group or the other because he just happened to see that good work and praised it. And then somebody else says, well, why didn't you praise me? Get that point. I think actually that's the more valid of the points, is being cognizant that if you're in a leadership role, you can't see all the good work's happening. And so you might call somebody out for doing something good, and somebody else in the room's like, hey, what about us? We did something even better. Why didn't you call me out too? So it could create that kind of dynamic. So I get that. But at the same time, I think praise is good. I think, he's definitely wants to publicly criticize people for not doing things correctly. I think at the same time, which is very transactional, by the way, that's a very transactional approach to leadership. So he's definitely using the stick more than the carrot, right? Because he's withholding the praise and just using the stick to motivate people. I don't know. I definitely don't agree with that one. I think praise is useful. I don't even think it's a tool. I think it's something that you need to use to show your empathy and that your support for your employees. And so I don't buy the withholding praise practice that he recommends. He also emphasizes your team is not a family. I agree with that. I think in organizations, we often talk about our teams or our organizations or our employees like we're a big family. That's not the truth. You're coming to work to get a specific job done in exchange for compensation. So it's not a family dynamic. There is not this altruism or unconditional love there. Actually, he believes in a bottom-out principle. So if somebody's the weakest performer of a team, they should be dropped out of the team. And you want to, because his philosophy is that the strongest people want to work together and they're going to thrive off of each other. I actually agree with that. I think we need to hold people more accountable. And if you have a team where there's one person dragging down the rest, get rid of that team member. Don't let them poison the rest of the workers, because if you can get rid of that team member who's not doing their piece and dragging everyone down and not motivated, you cut them off and you bring in somebody new who's fresh and energized and motivated. They're going to revitalize the team, and the people who are already top performers on that team are going to appreciate being able to collaborate with those other top performing team members. So I definitely agree with that. He also recommends hiring people who are hungry and not interested in the money or job titles. I agree with that too. I can agree with that too, though more nuance to this. I mean, people do get value from their job titles and of course the compensation that and benefits package that they're offered. Those are signals of how that employee is valued by the company and their role. So I wouldn't completely throw that out, but I do think it is a red flag when somebody's only interested in the job title or the benefits package or the pay. You want to see somebody who's really self-motivated and motivated by the mission of the organization. That's key. That is key. He also recommends not to work with people who aren't self-motivated because you cannot motivate people. You'll just be trying to drag a dead donkey across the desert, right? I just made that up. Dragging a dead donkey across the desert. That's kind of like trying to work with an unmotivated person who's not ambitious. Gets back to that hunger aspect. Motivation comes internally. It comes from the self, and it comes from your alignment of your personal values with the mission of the organization. So you want to make sure that people are self-motivated, and you're bringing those type of people into your organization. And he makes a good point. Like if you're not self-motivated, even in a distributed organization where you don't really have somebody looking over your shoulder and micromanaging you, you can get away with that for a while, but eventually it's going to show, and you will be bottomed out at some point. Finally, he recommends don't take your targets too seriously, and I agree with this one as well. as somebody who works in the crypto space and the blockchain Web 3.0 space, it's a very volatile area to work in. And so setting up targets is a fool's errand because the environment's constantly shifting and changing. So you're never going to achieve certain benchmarks and outcomes that you might hope to achieve. What you can do is, as he recommends, set up a goal. Once you've achieved that goal, set up another goal and so forth. But don't take them too seriously. Don't assume that just because you haven't achieved a certain outcome that it's a failure. It is partly about the striving toward your overall goals. I agree with that, and I think as we are recognizing more and more that we live in this VUCA world, this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, that we have to question things like outcomes and benchmarks, especially in our strategic and business and organizational planning, because we might not be able to achieve what we set out in our documentation, because the world changes underneath us. I'm definitely becoming more of an advocate of shorter strategic plans, like 3 years or so, so that they can be iteratively updated quickly and modified to adapt to the incredibly quickly changing environment that we live in. So definitely agree with him on not taking our targets too seriously. So all of those are great recommendations for leadership, I think. I mean, not all of them. There are definitely some I disagree with, but there's a lot of really good recommendations there if you reflect on it. So how do we square this? How can we square this guy who's able to build up an international company that was the biggest cryptocurrency exchange in the world, or is still the largest cryptocurrency exchange in the world, with this guy who's currently pled guilty to criminal violations and really, honestly, unethical behavior and contributing to some pretty serious criminal activity. Not that he did it himself, mind you, but that he knew that his platform was being used for it and that he didn't want it regulated so that he could profit off of those criminal activities happening on his platform. So how do we square that? Well, I think in the crypto world, they are a highly libertarian bunch of people. They are anti-tax. They don't want to pay bank fees. They want to use their money freely. They don't want regulation, especially by the U.S. government. So for them, he is a martyr and he is a saint. I mean, even in the language they use to describe what's going on, that he humbly decided to step down as CEO from Binance, and that he humbly accepted the guilty plea and so forth. So they're painting him as somebody who's being persecuted by the powers that be, the U.S. government. And so he might actually come out from their end looking stronger after all this. I think he's a much different than Sam Bankman-Fried, who I think will never get over the tarnish of what he did, because he lost people a lot of money, and that could be a distinction between CZ and Sam Bankman-Fried, is that CZ didn't lose a lot of people's fortunes. The company's still operating strongly as far as we know. I think their stock recently went back up after taking an initial dip, and based on the outcomes, people in the crypto sphere seem to be looking a little more bullish about Binance than maybe they were when this news story initially broke. So that's that world. But in the real world, there's no doubt that he also did some unethical and criminal things. And that's why he's going to be spending time in jail. And there was definitely a lot of hubris on his part by ignoring the calls for him to register with the United States government. And I want to make sure that before we wrap up this podcast, we really emphasize what was happening on Binance. They knew that criminal organizations were laundering money on their platform, and not just criminal organizations, but terrorist organizations. They knew that was happening. As one compliance employee wrote, and this is fantastic, right? As one compliance employee note, we should have a banner, and it should say, is washing drug money too hard these days? Well, come to Binance. We got cake for you. So we'll give you, he's literally saying, we'll give you a cake with your washed money. We're going to sweeten that deal, right? So they knew this was going on. That's directly from the investigation into their practices. They knew they knew money from ransomware attacks was being moved through their system. So I work in higher ed. We've been getting a lot of ransomware attacks. That's where a ransomware group will go in, break through your security defenses and your IT system and lock down your systems and demand money in exchange for opening them back up. It can cost organizations millions of dollars. I know schools that have had to pay out to restart to get access to their IT systems. And schools don't have a lot of money. We underfund them enough as it is. So, I mean, it's kind of preying on the vulnerable when you're doing ransomware attacks on a school. But they knew that money was being transferred through their Binance exchange and weren't doing anything about it. They knew people were moving money through the Binance system through dark web transactions. And these dark web transactions are, hardcore drugs, right? Not just marijuana. We're talking hardcore heroin, cocaine, things like that. Those level of drug transactions, probably fentanyl, other things like that. Prostitution, child sex trafficking, all kinds of different things that are pretty horrendous that are happening out on the dark web. Binance is complicit in that they knowingly let those transactions happen on their platform. So pretty serious. And another one is allowing people and organizations who had sanctions on them from the U.S. government to continue making transfers and exchanges through the Binance platform. And we're talking about countries like Iran, people like the Russian oligarchs who are under sanctions for the war in the Ukraine. So some really bad actors, and Binance was turning a blind eye to that. For their own profit. Let's make that very clear. For their own profit, they were doing this. So at the end of the day, we have this problematic figure in CZ. He obviously was a very capable leader. He grew a company to incredible heights. And flew too close to the crypto sun, like Icarus, like the crypto Icarus, and then fell. And it is ironic, right? It is ironic that one of his main tenets of his leadership approach was to be ethical, because he said, if you are not ethical, whatever you do that's unethical will end up coming back and biting you at the end of the day. And that is exactly what happened. So if you like this Sense and Signal Leadership and Sensemaking podcast, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and make a comment. What do you think about CZ and the future of the crypto world, and what leadership lessons we can learn from him? We look forward to hearing from you, and see you next time on the Sense and Signal podcast.